Marking December's uprising shows commitment of Yemenis to regain state. Intercepting Iran's smuggled arms to Houthis is not enough to protect Yemen. UN says more funding is needed to address the humanitarian crisis in Yemen and Sudan. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Shazad Delbey. 5 years ago, leader Ali Abdullah Saleh and his faithful companion Arif al-Zouka sacrificed their souls for the sake of Yemen and the Arab nation for the victory of the values of truth, justice, and freedom. This report has more details.
5 years ago, the martyr leader Ali Abdullah Saleh and his companion Arif al-Zouka offered their souls for the sake of Yemen and the Arab nation. They presented their lives for the values of truth, justice, goodness, equality, freedom, and democracy. They struggled for decades to achieve the goals of the revolution of the 26th of September and the 14th of October, represented in the establishment of a just republican system and the removal of the differences between the classes planted by the backward Imam rule. Over the years, leader Saleh and his companion built a strong national army to protect the revolution and its gains, raise the level of people economically, socially, politically, and culturally, and to establish a cooperative, democratic society. After all the sacrifices for the sake of the homeland, the Yemeni revolution is struggling today with a backsliding movement and miserable attempts to restore the Imami rule in light of the great popular rejection. 5 years after the historical moment, the moment of glory and eternity, facts and data confirm that the popular uprising is the only way to victory over the racist militia and Iran's terrorist arms and its sectarian network that extends from Sana'a to Tehran, passing through Beirut and Baghdad. The Iranian hatred was present against Yemen and its people in December 2017. They used their Houthi machine against the martyr leader because of his active participation in rebelling the Iranian aggression against Iraq. As for the Houthi militia, its hatred was compounded against the Republic, the farmer, the soldier, the politician, the leader, Ali Abdullah Saleh. The militia concentrated all its strength and capabilities on the residential neighborhoods surrounding the house of the leader Ali Abdullah Saleh. The late leader, however, stood up bravely, reciting his will, and put the equation on the right track again. People will be in face of the militia, and the mass uprising is the only way to salvation and victory for sovereignty, equality, independence, and the Republic. It was a great redemption, the martyrdom of the late leader Ali Abdullah Saleh.
GPC celebrated the December uprising in Ma'rib. The celebration was attended by many figures.
We come here today to commemorate the December uprising, in which the country has sacrificed the most prominent of its men, the leader Ali Abdullah Saleh and his companion Arif al-Zouka. We come also to prove to the world and inside Yemen that the 2nd of December's revolution is continuing until it reaches its goals. The Yemeni people considers December's revolution as the light that will get the country out of the dark tunnel. This uprising will continue until we restore the state and its institutions. It will continue until the Yemeni people restore their dignity, land, and unity.
The American Navy announced that they intercepted a shipment of Iranian arms that was meant for the Houthis. This is not the first time Iran is being involved in smuggling arms to Yemen. This report has more details.
Yemen saw cautious and unusual hope during much of 2022. A 2-month temporary ceasefire struck in April was extended twice, providing Yemenis with the longest period of peace in nearly a decade, and a period in which to begin attempting to alleviate the country's terrible humanitarian crisis, in which 11 million people face crisis levels of food insecurity, according to the UN's refugee agency. But it did not endure, and its failure at the beginning of October has had already disastrous consequences. Most crucially, a new wave of warfare puts people in danger. It also opens the door for greater war, deeper loss of Yemeni sovereignty, and fresh opportunities for destabilizing forces to exploit the country's incapacity to defend itself. The main culprit in this case is Iran. It has long counted Yemen's Houthi rebels among its regional proxies. On Saturday, the U.S. accused Iran of attempting to transport over 1 million rounds of ammunition and rocket components to Yemen, following a massive weapons discovery at sea. Despite the efforts of coalition partners, Yemen lacks a firm foundation from which to restore its security and response to challenges as complicated as smuggling and foreign influence. Furthermore, the Houthis continue to target maritime facilities, most recently the Al Dabba oil facility in Yemen's Hadramaut province. With the global economy already in peril, inadequate security in huge areas of the strategically important waterways surrounding the Gulf cannot be tolerated. Despite the recent success of the ceasefire, over a decade of warfare has demonstrated that diplomacy is difficult to bring about a peaceful end in Yemen. This is not always a diplomatic failure, but rather an indication that not enough is being done. The UN, Western allies, and the GCC have all demonstrated genuine commitment. On Wednesday, UAE President Sheikh Mohammed addressed the possibility of improving ties between the two countries with Rashad Al-Alimi, chairman of Yemen's Presidential Leadership Council. Nonetheless, the case for a wider global reaction is becoming increasingly compelling. While it has since expired, a truce in Yemen did exist earlier this year, providing actual relief. Success might re-energize diplomatic efforts abroad, especially in relation to the numerous regional crises involving Iran.
أبي مات بشارع 40 دحين أنا أشقى على أسرتي مع باقي اللي أنا أصرف عليهم كل شيء. أنا اسمي أنس وصيب سيف، عمري 12 سنة. أنا أشتغل بورشة حديد من الساعة 7 للساعة 6. أحيانا أسرع، أحيانا أقص، أحيانا أرنق، أحيانا أنقش، أي حاجة أنا أعمل. لا الساعة لما تبدأ الساعة 6 أوقف. أنا وقفت الدراسة عشان ما في أحد يشقى على أسرتي. أدرس أخواني الباقي. من دون 4 وأنا الخامس. أحلم إني أفتح ورشة أبي وأشقى على أسرتي وأندي لهم مصاري.
Government forces thwarted a Houthi attempt to stop their positions northwest of Taz. The media center of Taz Axis said that the Houthi attempt took place near the old airport northwest of the city and resulted in deaths and injuries among the militia. Armed clashes renewed between tribes in Al Jawf. Local sources said that the clashes erupted after the Sufyan tribes, loyal to the Houthis, made military reinforcements in places related to Zu Muhammad tribes, and the tribes responded to them. The Iran-backed terrorist Houthi militia admitted the death of a number of its members, including 3 officers. The militia held the funeral of 4 of its fighters in Sana'a, and military sources reported that there were deaths and injuries due to renewed battles between government forces and the Houthi militia south of Ma'rib. Massam Project announced it cleared more than 5,000 mines and unexploded ordnance in November. Massam stated that in the past week, the teams cleared more than 1,000 mines and unexploded ordnance. The United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said that more than 23 out of 31 million Yemenis need humanitarian assistance. The UN agencies can only provide aid to 11.6 million each month. This report has more details.
The United Nations appealed for a record $51.5 billion in aid money for 2023, with tens of millions of additional people expected to need assistance, testing the humanitarian response system to its limits. The appeal represents a 25% increase in 2022 and is more than 5 times the amount sought a decade ago. The UN Global Humanitarian Overview estimates that an extra 65 million people will need help next year, bringing the total to 339 million in 68 countries, which represents more than 4% of the people on the planet, or about the population of the United States. Over 100 million people have been driven from their homes as conflict and climate change fuel a displacement crisis. For the first time ever, 10 countries have individual appeals of more than $1 billion, including Ethiopia, Nigeria, Somalia, and Yemen. But donor funding is already under strain with the multiple crises, forcing aid workers to make tough decisions on priorities. The United Nations faces the biggest funding gap ever, with its unmet funding at 53% in 2022, based on data through mid-November. Unlike in other parts of the UN where fees depend on countries' economic size, humanitarian funding is voluntary and relies overwhelmingly on Western donations. Yemen's protracted conflict has exacerbated food insecurity, with an estimated 19 million people needing assistance as of August 2022, representing about 60% of the population. The economic impacts of the war in Ukraine have also exacerbated food insecurity concerns in Yemen. Between August 2021 and August 2022, the price of the minimum food basket increased by 65% in the south and 31% in the north of the country, according to the latest WFP monthly food security update.
Coming next in the news. New study shows that climate change has increased desertification in Yemen.
ناس ندي ماء من الغيل والغيلة بعيد، كنا ندي بالدواب نعبي ماء ورجعنا. كنا ننزل الساعة 5 رجعنا الساعة 9.
ما يجي لنا ظهر لأنه زحمة ما حد يخلي الجهل يغرق وإحنا تعبنا زيادة.
وكنت أحس صدري يوجعني وعز قدرك ركبي يوجعيني.
كنا ما نستخدم حتى مغسل أولادنا إلا يعني بأيام معدودة.
كنت أغيب على المدرسة لأن كنت أروح الديمة.
حتى وإن كان يجي الأمطار تروح هدر لأنه ما في معي خزانة.
الواحد مشتري ب30,000 هي معها استهلاك ما يغلقش معها الشهر.
بس راح تطلب الله ولا أي حاجة، عاملة كل شغلك على الماء.
Welcome back. The Association of Mothers of Abductees appealed to rescue 4 journalists in the prisons of Houthis. The Yemeni journalist syndicate denounced the Houthi militia's torture of journalists in the prisons years ago. This report has more details.
The Yemeni journalist syndicate denounced the Houthi militia's continued torture of abducted journalists in its prisons for years. 2 days after it was revealed that the kidnapped journalist Tawfiq al-Mansouri was severely tortured by a Houthi leader. The syndicate said in a statement that it received a report from the families of the journalists kidnapped by the Houthi group since June 2015, stating that colleague Tawfiq al-Mansouri was tortured and beaten on the head until his skull was broken by a Houthi leader supervising the file of the kidnapped, and he was also transferred with colleagues Abdul Khaliq Umran and Harith Hamid to solitary cells. It added that in the face of this horrible persistence in torture and intimidation of the kidnapped journalists for more than 7 years, the Yemeni Journalist Syndicate strongly condemns these violations against unarmed journalists, whose freedom is restricted in arbitrary and compelling circumstances. The Journalist Syndicate expressed its fears for the lives of the fellow abducted journalists, in light of this repressive treatment and the Houthi securities officials' pleasure in torturing unarmed abductees and depriving them of the right to health care and visitation. The syndicate called on all organizations concerned with freedom of opinion and expression, led by the Federation of Arab Journalists and the International Federation of Journalists, to continue solidarity with Yemeni journalists, press for the release of all abductees, and provide a safe environment for journalistic work in Yemen. On Friday, the families of the kidnapped sent an urgent communication saying that the journalist al-Mansouri was severely tortured inside the Central Security Camp in Sana'a, which led to his skull being fractured. The families called on all organizations concerned with protecting journalists and defending human rights locally and internationally to confront Houthi leader Abdul Qadir al-Murtada and his assistants and to take measures to secure the lives of the detained journalists. It also called on the UN envoy and United Nations organizations to intervene to stop the repressive and brutal practices against Tawfiq al-Mansouri and his fellow colleague to save their lives and transfer them urgently to the hospital for treatment.
The Yemeni Network for Rights and Freedoms documented about more than 3,000 incidents of violations against mosques and places of worship. It noted that the violations were committed by the terrorist Houthi militia in the period from January 1, 2015 to April 30. Informed sources in Sana'a revealed that the Iran-backed Houthi militia has adopted a plan to stop all sectors of women from all government institutions. Informed sources in Sana'a stated that the Houthi militia had agreed to plan to restructure all government institutions, including the ending of all sectors of women in education, technical education, local administration, youth, sports, and other institutions that have a sector specialized in women's issues. A study prepared by the Yemeni government and the UN warned of the impact of climate change in the next few decades. This report has more details.
A study prepared by the Yemeni government and the UN warned of the impact of climate change during the next few decades, alerting that it would increase desertification to 86% of the country's total area. The study reviewed the impact of climate change on Yemen and was prepared by the Studies Department of the Ministry of Planning and International Cooperation. It stated that the climate indicators and data recorded increased surface temperature in recent years due to the greenhouse gas effects. Yemen ranked 20th among the countries that suffer from high water stress, which could increase the possibility of water poverty due to traditional irrigation systems that cut farms that consume much water, climate change, and high emissions of greenhouse gases. It attributed the increased desertification to the scarcity of monsoon rains, droughts, and more recently, erosion caused by flash floods. It warned that this negatively affected vegetation cover, land productivity, shallow and groundwater, wildlife, and livestock breeding, which are primary sources of livelihood for the majority of the population. According to the study's authors, the misuse of agricultural lands, the depletion of groundwater reserves, climate change, increased water scarcity, and frequent floods and storms have affected rural agricultural development and severely damaged agricultural resources, representing 80% of them. The rural population constitutes 74% of the total population of Yemen, thus increasing poverty and death rates due to malnutrition, the highest in the Arab region and the world. The adverse effects appear more among vulnerable groups, including children, women, marginalized groups, disabled people, elders, and people with mental illness.
The Electricity Corporation in Aden warned that the power stations are expected to go out of service. It called upon the PLC to speed up the provision of diesel for power generation stations after the fuel ran out. It added that all concerned authorities were unable to provide fuel despite the repeated calls over the last period. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. Marking December's uprising shows commitment of Yemenis to regain the state. Intercepting Iran smuggling arms to Houthis is not enough to protect Yemen. UN says more funding is needed to address the humanitarian crisis in Yemen and Sudan. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching. It was Shazab Delbey.